Sluts in the Park, take 2.
Hi, I'm Allison.
And I'm Josh, and we're the Camera Project.
So the OMD E-M1 Mark II camera from Olympus is their top-of-the-line micro four thirds camera. It has a 20 megapixel sensor, and it is coming into the market at about a $2,000 price point for the body only.
So let's take the camera through its paces and check out Central Park.
Just a quick chat about form factor. This is the biggest camera that's coming out of the Olympus Micro Four Thirds line. The body is a bit bigger than the E-M5, if you've seen our review on that camera, and it does have a substantially bigger grip. So it's pretty comfortable to just hold in your hand and carry it around. Overall, the body is heavier. The switches, knobs, and dials are pretty similar, very similar to the E-M5. It's got these tactile dials that can kind of be assigned to whatever task you want. If you want it to be adjusting your aperture or your ISO or whatever feature you like. So that's kind of a nice thing that the Olympus has carried over into this newer model of the E-M1. Very customizable, both within the digital menu and on the body of the camera. The screen flipping out, same as before, touch screen, really great.
Now we are shooting with the 12-100 f4 as we said earlier. And I will note that this lens is pretty heavy. It's definitely heavy, even with this larger grip. It does feel balanced, but it's definitely on the heavier side. Let's put it that way.
So we are here by the ball fields in Central Park. Obviously, this is a great place if you want to play a team sport or get some exercise outdoors. And one of the standout features on this Olympus camera is the autofocus, which makes it great for shooting action. And Josh is going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when this camera was announced, certainly the standout number that everyone said was 60 frames per second, and that's full quality, full RAW, everything. But the thing you need to know is that's electronic shutter only, and it's single autofocus, meaning you autofocus at the beginning of the shot and then you stop. So that's great if you're trying to capture a batter hitting the ball. It's not so great if you want to follow them running to first base. Now, if you want that, that's 18 frames a second with electronic shutter, and that's at full continuous autofocus. If you want mechanical shutter, that's going to be 15 frames a second with single autofocus and 10 frames a second at continuous autofocus.
And when I was shooting action, when I played with this camera, it's like, that's still a lot, and that's still pretty fast.
That's funny.
And we also noticed on this camera that the face detection was even better than the E-M5 Mark II, so that's definitely an upgrade there as well. Josh, what do we need to know about the Pro Capture mode?
So Pro Capture mode is really interesting, and what it allows you to do is as soon as you start half pressing the shutter down, or if you use back button focus, it'll work with that too. Basically, it's buffering the scene, and what that means is that it's capturing before you start pressing the shutter down. So basically, from the time you hit record to start taking pictures, it's captured the last second or 14 frames of stills. So it's great if you just missed the batter making contact with the ball or someone jumping off a diving board or something like that. It's fantastic. Now, one thing about action that I'm thrilled to report is that this is the first Olympus camera to have a minimum shutter speed number in auto ISO. So you can say, all right, I know I need at least 1/500th of a second to freeze the scene, but I want to be shooting an aperture priority to have a nice out of focus background. The problem I found is that it's a little hard to find this setting. It's buried in the menus and it's not accessible via the quick menu here, the OK button. So I wish it was more accessible. They have a lot of other features where you can go into the setting and hit info for more settings. I wish they did something like that because it just takes too long to get to it.
I kind of want to come back to Pro Capture for a second. Isn't there a similar feature that we looked at on another camera that we reviewed? Was it the GH5?
Yeah, so the Panasonic cameras have something called 4K or 6K photo mode.
Right, and that kind of like...
And you can do a pre-burst mode there as well. The difference you need to know is that's JPEG only, and it's essentially coming from video file.
Right.
This is full RAW support, which is a big deal.
So I think this is something that's becoming a lot more standard across digital cameras nowadays.
Yeah, so if we're talking about the autofocus modes on this camera, there's continuous autofocus where you could choose 1 point, 5 points, 9 points, or even the whole frame. And there's continuous tracking where you select your subject and it will attempt to track it across the frame. So let's try all of these things out here in the ball field and see how they perform. All right, so I'm gonna start at just traditional continuous autofocus. I'm gonna set the camera to this 5-point target here. So I can essentially move the target around as I'm shooting and also just try to track it manually. When I did the whole scene, I was finding that it tended to get lost. So I'm gonna try a smaller area, the 5, the 9, the single, and I found I was seeing better results in my tests. So right now I'm just in regular mechanical shutter, and I'm gonna go to low mode so I know I have continuous autofocus. All right, seemed to perform really well there. Let's try it again. I'm gonna move over a little so I can get the path to first base a little better. Baseball's a slow sport. Technically softball. Now, one thing I am experiencing is the buffer is filling right now. When the buffer is filling, I can't change any of my settings. I can keep shooting, but I can't change any settings. So as that little red card is still flashing on the back of the screen, basically I'm stuck, and that's a bit of an issue. All right, still filling the buffer. All right, Jesus, still filling.
So we are here in famous Central Park's Sheep Meadow. It's called that because it used to have sheep in it. And the Tavern on the Green, which is a famous restaurant, used to be the sheep fold where the sheep went at night to sleep and be protected from the outdoor elements, wild as they are here in Central Park. Other fun facts about Central Park, you may recognize it from its many appearances on film and TV, most notably from Spider-Man 3, Ghostbusters, and Home Alone 2, everyone's favorite movie.
Yes.
And now we're going to test some of the video features of the E-M1 Mark II. Josh?
Yeah,
Tell us more.
The big standout here is that it has the 5-axis image stabilization and that it works really well with the Cinema 4K. So we're gonna test out how well it does. Obviously it does fantastic if you're just standing still and you need it to, you know, steady your jerky hand. But if you need to walk or move with the camera, that's a whole nother story. So we wanna see how it does walking, and we're gonna try this sensor and lens-based combo here, because it's the 12-100, versus the sensor, lens, and digital combo, and see how they both do as we walk through Sheep Meadow.
Yeah, and we can imagine how Kevin McAllister might have felt in Home Alone 2 when he was walking through Sheep Meadow with a camera following.
And Tim Curry.
Tim Curry, let us never forget. So this is just handheld, static, not moving, on purpose anyway.
Yeah, so you're at 100 millimeter right now.
Zoomed all the way in. It's pretty smooth. It's kind of giving like a floaty thing. Something I've noticed about the stabilization, if you've got it all on in the Olympus, is it's like if you move intentionally for a pan or a tilt, you get this kind of like bumper type of thing where it's like when you stop, it's kind of overcorrecting a little bit. This is doing a better job than the EM5.
Definitely.
But where I see that this stands out, yeah, is if you're not trying to move at all, or if you're just tracking, you're walking toward or away from your subject or following someone. So let's try that. And now I'm zoomed in at 50 because 100 is like a bit much. Zooming out. And now if I do a pan, hey, there's the camera people. And once I stop, you see it kind of like stops hard. Another nice thing about this in video mode is it does focus peaking with manual focus while you're shooting. It won't do zoom in for focus assist, but what can you do? I think this always like looks actually pretty good if you like come around your subject. It's very smooth. It's very fluid. You get less of a stutter on a stop with just the sensor. But it's still noticeable.
So in a place like here where there's not a ton of straight lines, you get away with a lot. If you're in the middle of Midtown where you have buildings around you, you start to see this weird wobble at the edges of the frames when you're at a wider, like the 12 millimeter setting on the lens. Once you get toward 25, certainly at 50, that kind of disappears. But if you're shooting really wide, you get this weird wobble. The digital actually helps to correct that really nicely. But the problem with the digital is you do see a little decrease in image quality, and you see a very noticeable crop to the Cinema 4K image.
This camera shoots video much as the E-M5 does, but it shoots Cinema 4K, and we've noticed another upgrade on this camera is noticeably less rolling shutter issues. It's also got multiple shutter speeds added for video mode, specifically 48 and 24.
Yeah, so it actually lets you dial in the video actual 180 or 360 video shutter speeds, which is fantastic.
And what else did you want to talk about, Josh?
Well, I want to talk about image quality. Now, it has Cinema 4K, goes up to 237 megabits per second. But what I found is the actual data rate it's recording is nowhere near that. So it's a variable compression, and it's more typically around 30 or 40 megabytes per second. So yeah, it's not really living up to that. But the quality does look nice. It just may not hold up to grading. The problem is with the 1080, which is really soft. For some reason, the 4K is super sharp. The 1080 looks kind of crappy. And I'm not sure why that is and how they're downsampling it.
In terms of the low light performance, you're probably going to get a pretty usable video image up to 1600 ISO.
Yeah, maybe 3200 depending on your use, but it gets pretty noisy over that. Now, I do have a bunch of issues with the video mode on this camera, and that's I'm being harsher on the camera because Olympus is starting to take video more seriously. So I want to talk about gripes that video pros are going to have. First of all, there's no log mode. There is a sort of cinema profile. It's just called picture profile on, and it's flatter, but it's not super flat. That's not a huge complaint. It's workable. Another problem I do have is that it only goes up to 60 frames a second at 1080. Now, a camera of this price and this generation, I really feel like they should have something like 120 frames a second, maybe 96 frames a second at least, something that gets higher speed, slow motion possible on this camera. And if they're shooting Cinema 4K, I would think it's doable. Maybe a firmware update, that would be really nice.
Especially when you consider that features like that are available on the GH4, which is an older model from Panasonic.
Right. Now, the camera does have dual card slots, but for some reason, video will only be written to one slot. So if you're shooting events or weddings or something like that, and you want to be capturing lots of video, you're not going to have that backup that you thought you had. Even if you set the cards to mirroring, it's only going to record to card slot 1, which kind of sucks.
And sounds like something important that you would definitely want to know.
Yeah. Now, we talked about auto ISO in this camera, but the problem with it is you can't use it when you're using manual mode in video. So let's say you want to be able to walk from inside to outside, but control all your other settings. You can't have auto ISO be the factor that will move up and down. Similarly, when you're in one of the priority modes for video, shutter or aperture, you have to be in auto ISO. So what if you're in shutter priority and you want your aperture to be the thing that rides and you want your ISO locked? You can't do that. It's something I wish you'd be able to do. Switching those modes, so going from shutter priority to manual mode, on the E-M5 II, it actually used to be easier. You could access it from the on-screen menus. Now you actually have to go deeper into the actual menu system of the camera, which I find a little annoying. You can't even do it from the quick menu, which is strange to me. And the other thing that I find kind of strange is there's this new focusing mode called pre-MF. And you'd think you could do a sort of rack focus with that, because what it lets you do is do a manual focus point that you can preset and have the camera snap to it. And that's great, and you could use it great in still mode, but once you hit record on that video mode, you can't access it anymore unless I just missed a setting there, and that seems like a miss that certainly could be upgradable in firmware. And they should do that, because then you could do some nice rack focusing there.
Yeah, I feel like there are a couple of other odd little quirky picadillos about video on the Olympus cameras also that I noticed in my picadillos. Also on my E-M5 along those lines, where the touch focus acts like that's a thing and then it won't really track, even though that is a setting. Also, when you're controlling video mode from the app, it doesn't allow you to autofocus in video mode. So just a couple of little odd
and along the notes
caveats.
Of the app is once you switch to video mode, it actually changes your quality of your recording. So not only can you not touch your phone to focus once you're recording, but it actually switches your quality mode to, I think, super fine and 1080 and gets you out of 4K. So that's kind of a miss too. So yeah, the quality on the Cinema 4K is actually really nice, and combine that with the excellent in-body image stabilization, you have a really capable video camera that's kind of just hindered by a lot of these software things that I hope they can fix in firmware, or certainly in the next version of this camera. People buying this camera may not want something for the next version though.
So that concludes our review and tests of the Olympus OMD E-M1 Mark II in beautiful Central Park, the famous setting of films such as Ghostbusters, Home Alone 2, Spider-Man 3, Weekend at Bernie's, It Takes Two, starring Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, Sex and the City, et al.
We assume.
Closing thoughts on this camera, I think that it's a good solid camera. I'm a big fan of Olympus and their approach to digital cameras. I think they do a really great job of building in a lot of solid features. It's a great all-around camera that can do just about anything you're gonna wanna do as a casual shooter. It allows you to, I think, really expand upon your skills, as well as kind of come in as a beginner or entry-level shooter. And it's highly customizable. So between the firmware, the software, and their kind of world of lenses, I think that it's a great system to start with and expand into.
Now you said the words casual shooter and start and things like that, but the question is, this camera doesn't exactly have a starter price. At around $2,000, do you feel like it's justified? And maybe not for you, but who is this camera for, and who, if anyone, is it worth it to pay that price?
Right, I think between the beefed up burst mode features as well as the fast autofocus, this is really kind of gearing towards someone who's shooting a lot of action and wants a lot of breadth in that department. For me, and I know Josh, you as well, we're shooting with Olympus OMD EM5 Mark IIs just in our kind of personal lives, which I also love, you know, have a lot of great things to say about that camera. So for this one to be, yes, the bigger, better brother to that camera, having it cost $1,000 more, which is basically double of what that EM5 costs now, I don't know that I can justify it, because
right.
I've been very happy with my camera, and I don't think that I really need quite the range that this is supplying. 10 frames a second, 8 frames a second at burst mode, these are all really good as is. So for me, 60 frames a second, I'm like, damn, like that's a lot.
I mean,
and
it's definitely
I can't
overkill
imagine a world where I'm
for a lot of
really
people.
using that.
Yeah, for most people it probably is overkill, but I would say for that person who, you know, is shooting diving or shooting baseball or shooting, you know, anything that's going to require those high frame rates and that really fast autofocus. I will say I did notice a significantly better autofocus on this camera than the M5 Mark II. It's quicker in low light. It's just more accurate in general, and I think that's huge. So part of me, as someone who's a big gearhead, wants to upgrade to this camera. Can I justify it? Well, that's a question for later, I guess. But yeah, it's definitely for a targeted user who has the money and can justify those features. I think for me, the standout, the new menu system is great. It makes it certainly more usable. There's room for improvement, certainly, but it's a step in the right direction. I think overall it's a great camera.
For sure.
We had our gripes with video and things like that, but overall, very usable. If you want to check out the EM1 Mark II, please check out our friends who lent us this camera over at Unique Photo.
UniquePhoto.com is their website as well if you need to go online to shop or to just get some resources, information about photography. They're really great, and their staff is also super helpful.
You could also rent cameras there, so if you want to test something out, please give it a try.
So that's it for us today, guys. If you like this video and want to see more, please leave us a comment with your thoughts, and please subscribe.
Please subscribe.
We'll die if you don't subscribe. Like Weekend at Bernie's.
We might. Yes. It all goes back to Weekend at Bernie's.
Your likes keep us alive.
Yes.